To start, I just wanted to share a fact because I was curious and I looked it up this morning. We have been marking Equal Pay Day for the last 25 years. The very first year we observed it was 1996. The pay gap has not closed in the time that we've been having this conversation. And as you heard Moira say earlier, we may need to wait many more years. But I'm hoping that the advice that these women are about to share will help us close it much, much faster. And this is a very crucial time to have this conversation about closing the pay gap faster because of everything we've seen about how the pandemic has disproportionately affected women. My own sources have said that they fear that when the women who've been pulled out of the workforce return, they will do so at lower salaries. And you heard Kelly say a bit about that earlier. But I'd love to turn to Shellye and to Tina to ask you both specifically, how in the past year have you seen the ways that fights for equality and equity have stalled or been complicated by the pandemic? I'll start with Tina.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Maggie. And I'm so glad to be here with you and Shellye and to mark this important moment and day to spur us on to even more activity on closing the pay gap. Look, the last year has been devastating for women. We know that, over 2.5 million women have actually left the workforce. Women's, unemployment rate continues to lag. It's, for Black and Latinx women, it's 1.5 times the unemployment rate it is for everyone else. And women's labor force participation is at its lowest level since the 1980s. So we've basically wiped out in the last year, decades of progress of more women entering the workforce. And this is not just happening at, the lower end of the wage scale. We see women who are on the pathway to the C-suite who are leaving, who are unable to sort of manage caregiving responsibilities. We know at home is one of the biggest barriers. And so, this is, as you point out, a critical moment to actually redouble our efforts and to actually attack some of the structural barriers that have existed for women in the workforce and succeeding. And those are the contributions to the pay gap. They've existed for years. The pandemic just cracked it wide open for everybody to see. And so now the opportunity exists to actually push through that and address those long-term barriers, like the fact that we're one of 2 countries in the world with no national paid leave. I could go on.
Shellye, you sit on a number of different corporate boards. So I'm wondering, take what Tina just said. What specifically should corporate leaders be doing to rethink their leadership in this regard, initiatives that they should be putting forward? What should they be doing?
Absolutely. So leaders need to realize that this is not a women's issue. It's not a women's issue. It's a total economy issue. It's everyone's issue. McKinsey did a study recently that showed that if we continue with letting women leave, et cetera, like all the numbers that Tina just shared, it's $1 trillion impact on GDP in 2030. All right. Now, if we could just close the gap, we'd add $13 trillion to GDP. That is good for everybody. Right? It's more taxes, it is more opportunities, it's more jobs, and that's for everybody, not just women. So when I look at what companies need to do, it's to think about this as a holistic, it's good for the company, it's good for the economy, it's good for society. This is not a women's issue. When it becomes a women's issue, it tends to be off to the side. No, this needs to be front and center. So companies that are truly leaning forward on this are actually realizing that and taking proactive steps to figure out, okay, what do we do? Let me give you a simple example. In many respects, I ask companies and leaders all the time, why did we let them leave? Why did we let them leave? Why didn't we create even just a leave of absence versus a formal leave? Or why didn't we figure out a way to, is it part-time? Is there flexibility? It's easy when somebody comes in and says, I have to leave, to say, okay. That doesn't mean that doing the easy thing is the right thing. The right thing is to care about employees, to care about the company, and to care about the economy as a whole, and figure out, okay, how can we be creative to figure out how we work through this? And some companies are being creative, but we need more and more to indeed approach it that way.
That's such a simple question. Why did you leave? But to your point, simple is not always easy. Simple can be quite hard. One of the other very specific initiatives that I've seen take place in corporate America over the last several years are more pay equity analyses, right? Companies are analyzing what's the gap in my workplace, and some are paying out millions of dollars to solve that gap. The problem is what we've seen, and this is a nuance to the conversation, a one-time $5 million payout doesn't fix the problem. You have to pay again and again because you might inherit gaps from other companies as you hire from other companies. So that's a nuance to this conversation. What other nuances are there that we're not talking about right now? What are the levers that we need to pull that aren't being pulled? Tina, I'll start with you.
Well, it's a pretty timely question, Maggie, because actually today, Time's Up is releasing a study together with Ideas 42 called From Ideal Worker to Ideal Workplace. And we actually took a look at the pay gap and the what happens inside of companies from an aspect of behavioral design, right? What's wrong with the way we've designed work that contributes to the pay gap? And you're right, it's not just you can fill the gap one time, because if you look over the life cycle of a worker, when we've designed work that is around the ideal worker who can spend all of their time at work, right? That's, never takes a vacation. That's the ideal worker paradigm. That doesn't work for women. It doesn't work for women over their careers. So we're saying you should actually get rid of that paradigm, look at ideal workplace. And when you look at the career paths for women, they lose out when they start at hiring and recruitment because they often get hired at a lower salary. Then they have scheduling issues over the course of their careers that, leave them out of opportunities at the workforce. And then when they get to the promotion stage, the gap's even bigger because they're not getting promoted. And job segregation is about 50% of the pay gap that contributes to that. So we've got to attack by behavioral design each of those. And in our new report that's out today, we actually give companies 9 different, in each of the realms of hiring, of scheduling, and of promotions, 3 different strategies that you can do to change the design in your company, the way you do your hiring practice, the way you do your scheduling, the way you do your promotions, to get rid of that ideal worker bias and instead reward managers who approach this from an ideal workplace that will benefit women. And this is not about changing individual attitudes. It's about changing the design features in your workplace so that managers can do the right thing.
I love that. Get rid of the ideal worker bias. I think that hurts everyone. But you make a good point about the holistic aspect of this, right? I mentioned pay equity analyses, but it's not just paying people. It's the promotion, it's the hiring. So Shellye, to that point, what are some other initiatives that help attack this from a holistic level that you've seen be successful?
In addition to the excellent design points that Tina talked about, the holistic element also brings in the culture. This is about changing the culture. We need to create cultures where people are actually committed to compensation and promotion and opportunities that are equitable, right? Across the range. How do you do that? You do that by setting expectations for managers. I really believe a lot of this sits just in the hands of managers. For instance, how you pay people upon hiring. Well, there should be a scale. There's not an issue of women or men. Here's what the job is worth. Here's what we pay and what we offer, right? 2, a leader's job is to create more leaders, full stop. So we should be incenting managers to actually develop people. And we should be evaluating them and their management skill on how well they develop diverse talent. If diverse talent is truly important to us, then it needs to be through and through our overall strategy and how we approach the overall workplace. So if managers can't demonstrate that they can actually hire, develop, and promote diverse employees, they shouldn't be promoted. All right. I mean, they're really some very simple things. It's about setting expectations, making sure those expectations are consistent across the board so that you can create the culture that you want. Because you're right. I've seen too many times the knee jerk of addressing the symptoms. Oh, we now have parity. We make the announcement. Great. A year later, well, we've got to write the check again. Well, you keep adding water to a leaky bucket and you're going to be adding water forever. And you make zero progress. Okay, this is not rocket science. We've got to go into the root cause and actually plug those gaps and understand that at the end of the day, it's the bucket. Let's fix that bucket. Okay, this is not hard. It just takes intention. We can put people on the moon. We can create cars that don't drive. We can create plants that grow without any nutrients. We can create amazing things. We can fix the bucket.
We can fix the bucket. I want to get that as a banner and put it in my apartment windows. I love it. Now, I think it's the other panel right before us touched on this, and it's a really important point. We can talk about the bucket broadly, but we can't generalize everything. And while Equal Pay Day is tomorrow, right, the day until which all women must work to make what men made the prior year, it's not the same across all races. Asian American women would have to work until March 9th. Black women have to work until August 3rd. August. and it's even later for Native American women and Latinas. So how can we specifically find opportunities for these communities, and especially the Black and Asian American communities? We've seen the social justice protests. We've seen the awful hate crimes over the last year. So it's a really complicated issue right now, but an important one. So Tina, I'll start with you. How can we better support Asian American workers at this moment?
Well, we've got to recognize that, Black, Asian, Latinx women, they sit at that intersection of racism and sexism, and we need to address it. With as much progress has been made, as you point out, for white women, Black women, Latinx women, are far behind. We did a survey in the summer, in the middle of the pandemic, that showed over half of Latinx and Black women had less than $200 in their bank accounts right then, compared to 37% of white women, 27% of white men. And that was in the summertime. So you can imagine where they're at right now. So we're at a critical moment right now where we need to invest in the kinds of jobs and structures that will help these women. So one of the key things we're working on at Time's Up right now with a coalition of organizations is to make sure that the new infrastructure bill that's being proposed by the administration doesn't just include roads and bridges infrastructure, that it includes an investment in caregiving infrastructures, meaning affordable care, both child care and elder care, in-home care services, paid leave for everyone, and supports for fair wages and labor protections for caregivers themselves. These are jobs overwhelmingly held by Black, Brown, and Asian women. So we need to invest in them and make them a real career. And it's also the fact that women will need these caregiving jobs to go back to work. And we've actually shown at Time's Up, we issued a study that if you invest $70 billion a year, as the Biden campaign proposed, you can create 2 million jobs a year. You can generate $220 billion of economic activity every year. So this is as stimulative to the economy as a road or bridge job for infrastructure. And I would submit it's more shovel ready than a road or bridge job, because you can turn that on right away. And that doesn't even count the stimulation that will happen to the economy, because these are jobs that allow someone else to go to work. And if we don't solve these issues, Black and brown women are going to continue to be excluded from the workforce and from moving up the ranks, as we talked about earlier, because if you aren't able to, in an affordable way, solve the caregiving challenges that you have at home, your career is going to get stunted or even lost.
I think the economic argument is so clear. It's so obvious to me. I don't know how anyone could disagree with it. But there is also the value argument. And we were talking a little bit about this before we came on. Shellye, how does pay equity and how do all of these issues make people feel at work? And why is it important to think about that?
If people are being compensated unfairly, then they feel they're being treated unfairly. And let me tell you, people who feel they're being treated unfairly are not your most productive workers, number one. So from a business standpoint, that makes no sense. Two, they're more likely to leave. As a matter of fact, I saw a statistic the other day that said that almost 50% of Black women are thinking about leaving their job in the next 2 years. Think about that number. Think about that number. Think about the cost to the companies. Think about the cost to the economy. Because when you leave a job, you've got to train somebody for the job. They go to a new job. They have to get trained. You lose collectively years, right, of actual productivity and overall impact. So when you create an environment in which people feel that they are being treated unfairly, you create an environment in which your company cannot be as successful as it absolutely could be. Imagine if every worker could contribute to their full capability. It would be amazing. And most CEOs, right, executives, that's exactly what they want. Well, then let's focus on it. Let's understand how people are not being treated fairly, which includes compensation, which includes job titles, which includes role expectations, which includes the ability to even have the chance to compete, right, for a new job. Forget whether or not you get it. Give me the opportunity to compete, right? It's whether or not I'm getting training, I'm getting development, I'm getting supported, I have mentors, I have sponsors. All of these elements fit in to whether or not people are feeling that they are being treated fairly and that they are desired as employees and seen as a critical contributor to the success of the company.
And I will add, just to build on to that, because Shellye's absolutely right. in addition to the worker themselves feeling that they're treated unfairly, their coworkers see that. And you set up in your broader culture the kind of toxicity that leads to sexual harassment. Look, if you are not paying women what they're worth and you don't value them, you don't demonstrate that you value them, then you don't respect them, then workers in your environment also treat women that way. And that leads you down the path to the kind of toxicity in workplaces that leads to sexual harassment, which I have always said is a symptom of a workplace that actually is fundamentally broken.
That is such an important point. It is all so interconnected, which is why it's so crucial that we have these conversations. But I want to go back to a point that I started to make at the very beginning of this conversation, which is this is the 25th Equal Pay Day that we are observing. So for 25 years, we've been talking about this, which is simultaneously encouraging and discouraging to me because of how, we haven't actually closed the gap. So how do we prevent ourselves from feeling discouraged? Because I think it can feel a little discouraging when you have these conversations year after year and you're not seeing meaningful change. Shellye, I'll start with you.
Well, I will just share something that has changed. And frankly, only in the last 5 years, really, is this topic is a topic that is discussed much more frequently in the boardroom. Now, should it have taken us 40 years to have it be discussed in the boardroom? The answer is no. But the good news, right, what can we see as positive, is that it is. And so being discussed in the boardroom means it's now something that is top of mind. It's being looked at, it's being analyzed, right? And once you first step in solving any problem is actually acknowledging it. So the fact that this is now being acknowledged at the senior levels, I see as a good sign. And it's up to, frankly, all of us as leaders and in the roles that we play to actually make sure that it stays top of mind. And not just in terms of here what the numbers are, but now how are we addressing it? Because as Tina was talking about before, pay equity is just one piece of the full puzzle, right? The full puzzle. The full puzzle is we need to make sure that we are treating everyone fairly, equitably. Compensation is just an element of it. So as we focus on trying to build the strongest, diverse teams that can indeed perform the way we need them to perform, so every company can compete in the overall marketplace, this is just one piece of it, but it needs to be part of a holistic strategy on how we create an environment within our companies that enable everyone to actually be able to contribute to their full capability and have the ability to grow and have access to opportunity.
I think that has entered the sorry, I think I'm producing a bit of an echo, but that it's entered the boardroom in bigger numbers is in more recent years is one reason to feel hopeful. Tina, what, if anything, makes you feel hopeful that we'll close this gap? And do you think we'll close it before 2059, as Moira said earlier?
Well, I'm hoping we close it before 2059. I will either be really, really old or not around when that happens. So that's our goal. I agree with Shellye. Look, there has, one silver lining in this horrible year that we have had is the universality of the impact of the pandemic, where everyone has been at home. So spouses can't just go off to work and ignore the fact that their spouse has been at home dealing with kids and trying to balance work. Manufacturing companies are telling the Wall Street Journal they can't field a full day of work on their shop floors because their workers aren't coming to work because they know they have caregiving responsibilities at home. So we're seeing that shift where things like caregiving, instead of being looked at as the thing you're supposed to figure out by yourself as a worker, employers stay invested in it. Public policymakers are staying invested. So we have an opportunity right now to make the kind of transformational change in our country around the workforce, similar to the change of a decade ago, right after the Great Depression, where we really changed how we thought about government supports for folks getting out of poverty, for labor protections, for how work should be organized. We're in the 21st century. Now's the time to make that change, to invest in our workers for this century right now. And I actually think we're in the middle of the moment where that can happen.
I certainly hope so. I have like 30 seconds left and just one more question for each of you. We're asking everyone to share with us their personal motto or words of wisdom for driving change forward. So I feel like the bucket might have been it, but I'm going to start with Shellye. Shellye, what is your motto for driving change?
Use your power. Everyone has more power than they realize. It's the power to ask questions. It's the power to shine the light on an issue. It's the power to support someone. Everyone is power. Use your power.
And Tina, what about you?
Well, that's a great one. But I will say that I'm going to borrow one from my old boss, President Obama. And because of this moment that we're in, I think the motto is, we are the change we've been waiting to see, because it is right here in front of us if we push hard enough. It's not going to happen by itself. So we have to be the change. But I really believe we're in that transformational moment.
Excellent, excellent note to end on. Thank you both so much for your time. I so appreciate your insight. And thank you to everyone at home for tuning in.